Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We are so excited to have you, and we will be getting started in just about a minute. Feel free to get comfortable. We are hanging out for just a minute, and we will get started once everybody has rolled in from that waiting room. Really excited to have you here today. We've got a really great session ahead of us. So as soon as we have kind of critical mass of everybody in from that waiting room, we will go ahead and get started. I'm going to give us about 30 more seconds, but thank you for being here. We will be rolling very soon. Okay, I'm seeing lots of folks still trickling in, but I think we can go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. I am so excited to have you here. My name is Brinton. I use she, her pronouns. I am from Team Handshake, and I work on our student marketing team. I'm really, really excited to welcome everybody here today for an awesome session all about the big question. What am I going to do with my life? I know that back in college, Thanksgiving break was very much a bittersweet time because it was a much anticipated break from the chaos of school and work. But I also knew I was bound to hear the "what are you doing after graduation? What are you doing with your life?" question around Thanksgiving dinner. And so well-intentioned, but sometimes a little bit tough to answer. Our speakers today have some serious knowledge about determining your purpose and building a fulfilling career. So they're going to spend the next 40 minutes or so in a structured discussion, and then we'll have about 15 minutes at the end for a live Q&A from you, the audience. So feel free to add those questions into the Q&A box throughout the session, and we will do our best to get to as many of them as we can before we end. And with that, I am so excited to turn it over to our speakers today and my colleague Christine, who will be guiding the first part of this conversation. Christine, take it away. I'm going to fade into the background.
Thank you so much, Brinton. Hi, everyone. My name is Christine Cruzvergara. I'm the Chief Education Strategy Officer here at Handshake, and I could not be more excited to be talking to the one and only Suzy Welch today. For those of you who have not been to any of my office hours or who haven't had a chance to interact with me before, I've been at Handshake for about 5.5 years. I have the honor and privilege of working with over 1,500 universities and colleges across this nation to make sure that they are able to help provide you Handshake and to get you lots of great opportunities. And prior to this, I actually spent the first decade of my career working in higher education. And I have advised thousands of students myself on how to get their first internship, their first job, even their second or third jobs. So really excited to be here with Suzy to talk about how we do that and how we can help you create a very tangible, very tactical plan as you go into the Thanksgiving break. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Suzy to introduce herself as well, and then we'll jump right into the conversation.
Hello, everybody. Hi, I'm Suzy Welch, Professor Suzy Welch. I'm a professor of management at NYU Stern School of Business, where I teach undergraduates like yourselves, as well as MBAs and executive MBAs. I have a long career in industry, mainly in business and publishing and across a wide swath of different industries. I know some of you already. I've heard from you in my newsletter and through my podcast that you were going to be here today. Hello, and hello to my new friends. At NYU, I teach a class that's called Becoming You: Crafting the Authentic Life You Want and Need, which I designed a few years ago to help people find a way to answer the question, what should I do with my life? Which is exactly what I wanted to know the answer to when I was in college. And there was no method to getting to the answer. There just was a lot of noise coming in and a lot of pressure coming in. And so I, like most people, just bumped through life kind of discovering it by accident and making a few detours and wrong turns along the way. And when I finally was in a position where I thought I had a methodology that would help you get there faster and sooner, because that's what we all want to do. We all want to live a life where we feel exquisitely alive, where we are living our purpose. I thought, okay, I'm going to start to teach that class, which I have the great joy and honor of doing now at NYU and outside of NYU. So I'm really happy to be here today, and I look forward to sharing some ideas with you.
I love that. Okay, Suzy, we're going to jump right in. So you have this great methodology that you have created your course on. Can you give the audience kind of a high-level overview of what are some of those steps that they need to take? And then we can dive into each of them throughout our conversation.
Okay. All right. Look, the Becoming You is a methodology with two purposes. The first purpose is to give you an immediate answer to the question, what should I do with my life? Okay, which is probably burning question for many of you here today, but it's also a lifelong tool because you may think you know what you want to do with your life, but that job is not immediately available to you. So becoming you is a methodology that you can revisit again and again down the road of your life and sort of try to tweak and get to where you want to go, because you're not going to go there immediately with what you want to do with your life. You're going to get there, and I hope sooner rather than later. So the methodology basically says, now listen, the one thing about the methodology is it's a little, it starts off as very existential and then it gets very tactical. And the cool thing about it, or the thing I like about it, is it's both existential and tactical at the same time. And typically when we're in college, as most of you are, or in graduate school, we're just super tactical. We're like, I'm just going to, there's a job over there and I'm going to write I'm going to apply for it and I'm going to try to fit who I am into the requirements of that job. And becoming you comes from a totally different place. Becoming you says, find out who you are, paint an excellent self-portrait of who you are. Okay, know who you are in the details, what your values and your aptitudes and your interests are. We'll get into that. And go then find the job that fits you. Don't try to fit yourself to a job. That's the fast way to purpose. So the Becoming You methodology very simply, and it's not simple actually, but very simply says, determine what your values are, your deeply held beliefs, the things that drive you, what your creed is, what your inner motivation system is. Learn what your values are. Determine what your aptitudes are. You're all uniquely good at something, okay? And that has to do with your personality and the way your brain is wired, and you can actually test for that. And so we do. And then the third is to figure out, what are your economically viable interests? What actually calls you emotionally or intellectually that actually will pay you what your values need? Okay, some people need and want a lot of money, and some people do not care about money, and everything in between. And at the intersection of your values and your aptitudes and your interests is what I call your area of transcendence, which is your purpose. It's not just you living your best life, but it's you living your best life plus giving back. And that is one of the most beautiful things about this generation right now, is that they don't want to just self-actualize. They want to be connected to something bigger than them. They want to feel a sense of giving back and of goodness in their lives. And that's where the methodology tries to land you.
I love that. So let's kind of dig in at the beginning. I'm sure
Okay.
there are a lot of students on the line right now that are thinking, that sounds great, but I don't know how to figure out what my values are. Are
That's
there
right.
exercises or things that you would suggest students can do to start to discern what are those values that matter the most to them?
Yes, Christine, not only do people sit there right now thinking to themselves, what are my values? If they're like most people in this world, they're thinking, what even are values? I have research. I've done research here at NYU. I had a suspicion. For many years, I worked for Oprah at her Oprah magazine. And when I was typically lecturing around the world as part of being a columnist for her magazine, I would talk about making decisions based on your values. That's one of the areas of study that I have, is decision making. And
Mm.
after I would speak, there'd be a long line of people, and they would all say, "Wait, what are values again? You talk about them as if I know what they even are." And it's a word that's kind of been politicized, or it's kind of been stolen away by different people with different agendas. Values are deeply held beliefs, and we know their values if they drive our actions and our decisions. Okay, and there are 15 core human values. Everybody has a certain amount of each one. Sometimes you're very high on them and sometimes you're very low on them. And you actually have a values DNA profile, okay? And what you need to find out is what yours is. For instance, just to say what some of the values are, there's the value of how much achievement matters to you. Some people, are like Tom Brady, who has extremely high achievement value, where he says, what was stressful to him was not winning the Super Bowl. It was about winning and losing. And you really want to achieve very seen conventional success in your life. And for other people, achievement is it just doesn't call them. There's other things that are important in life. There's a feeling of another value, which is eudaimonia. This is a very widely held value with Gen Z, and it's about self-care and well-being and harmony and peace. There's a value called scope, which is how big a life you want. Do you want a big, exciting, stimulating life, even with the chaos it delivers? Or do you want a low scope life where things are tranquil and predictable? So there's 15 core values. I have a system where you can find them out. If we had another hour, you'd all know your values at the end of it, but it's important to know what your DNA values profile is, because that will help you decide what kind of work you should do. And there's no value that's good or bad. The values are, I'm a values agnostic. The values you have can only be good or bad for you. The problem with our values is that four things really get in the way of us living by our values. Number one is the sense of financial or economic security. And what ends up happening is we don't live in accordance with our values, even if we don't really care about money that much. We just make decisions based on what people are saying about money. So for instance, a lot of people go into banking or consulting because it's the highest paying job. And then they're in it for a few years and they're like, but the money just doesn't matter to me. I need and want something else. But for other people, the value of affluence is the driving value. There's no crime in it. There's no good or bad about it. You just have to be you. The second thing that gets in the way of us living our values is just expedience. What's easier? The job that's available to us. There's expectations, which is just a very polite way of saying your parents, okay, or just society or the culture. There's expectations of what you're going to do when you graduate from college, okay? And the final thing that gets in the way of us living by our values are just events, okay? We break our leg, we don't get a job we want, and we sort of drift away from our values. So there's exercises you can do, and there's tests you can take to find out your values. But even just knowing that you have values and trying to identify them is the first incredibly valuable step. What drives you? Is it family? Is it work? Is it achievement? Is it joy? Is it a sense of harmony and joy? There's actually a value called beholderism, which is that you need and want to be near beautiful things. Aesthetics drive you. This is a value, and it's important, if you've got it, to embrace it because it suggests a certain kind of work. So values are, I love what happens when young people and students of mine start to understand who they are through the lens of their values. They suddenly have a language to talk about who they are that makes sense, and they can talk about it with other people in a way that moves the conversation forward.
I love that. I wish we had another hour so that we all could do exercises with you. I'm curious, when you think about values, we have some folks on the line that I know are graduate students and some that have already been sort of young professionals that have been working for a little bit, and they're thinking about a pivot in their career.
Yes.
And I'm curious, from your philosophy, do you believe that values can change over time, and that what you value in your early 20s might look different in your 30s or your 40s? And if so, is this an exercise that you actually should do every few years, or maybe even every year, to sort of reassess if your values are the same?
Every day. I think our values, we just constantly need to be in conversation with with ourselves. So let's just talk about whether or not values change. I actually think about it more this way. I think we do have core values that are related to our personality and our aptitudes. And what happens as time goes on is the arc of life is long and it bends towards authenticity. And as life goes on and we get older, we have experiences where we start shedding the stuff that people have put on us. Okay, like I don't actually value work that much. Okay, or I don't actually value stuff that much. Or I have to be honest, I actually value stuff more. And so I think what's happening is a bending towards authenticity as we have experiences and we get some courage and we get some self-confidence to step away. I have 4 children in their 20s and 30s. They all had to go through this process of saying to me, Mom, my values are not your values. And I had to go through the process, the mother sort of saying, oh, darn, but okay, because I can get out there and teach this stuff and talk about how important it is that you own and embrace and live your own values, and then try to hold my kids to my values. Parents want their kids to have their exact values. That's just the way it goes. And one of the best and most freeing parts of understanding and talking about values, these 15 core values, is to be able to talk to your parents and say, look, you place a very high value on this thing called work centrism, which is work for work's sake. Okay, it's slightly different than achievement. And generationally, probably your parents maybe are higher on work centrism than you are. That's characteristic of my students, for instance. And to say, look, this is not about whether I'm good or bad. There's this thing called work centrism, which is whether or not work is the organizing principle of your life. You have that higher than me. let's not be mad at each other for it. This is a value and we get to choose our values, thank God. So it's a lifelong conversation, and we do revisit it. Our values do change as we have experiences. One thing that really changes your values is like having a really bad job and you really learn something, or having a kid that changes your values.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you mentioned the sort of conversation with your parents, because I remember so deeply my own personal experience of being a first gen student and
Yeah,
trying to talk to my dad, who had always sort of tried to push me towards what I perceived to be more practical
right.
sort of careers.
Absolutely.
And in his words, he was like, I just want you to be more successful than me.
Yes, that's
Like the
right.
whole reason why I moved here, why we immigrated here, was you could have a better life
Yes.
what I have.
So common.
And
So
it
common. Yeah.
really took me using his language to help him understand, actually, you have given me a better life because what you've given me is optionality. And I
Yes.
perceive that to be a better life, not necessarily more money, but to have options to choose what I want to do is different than what he was able to do.
Nothing heightens the conversation. It's like parents and their kids, they light up in this, because it may be down at a quiet bubble while you were applying to college. You weren't talking about it as much. Then the time comes when they're thinking, look, we'd like to stop the gravy train. We've been paying for you for a long time. And sometimes they just say it right out. Like my mother said to me the day I graduated from college, the gravy train is over. And believe me, we were of modest means. There was no big gravy train. And I remember literally thinking to myself, what gravy? But they did pay for me. Okay. I worked full time and so forth. But and I had to start having conversations with them. Now I had they were my parents were hippy dippy artists. And they totally did not have affluence as a value. And maybe because of that, I did. Like I did it when I first graduated, first from college, but mainly from business school, which I paid for myself. My number one value was wealth accumulation. I had not had it, and I didn't even have the language to talk about that. And my fellow students at Harvard Business School were like, "You're no fun. You're a grind. You never come to the parties." And I wish I had had the language to say to them, "Yeah, guess what? Right now, wealth accumulation, affluence is my value. I'm not ashamed. Okay, I just am not in your shoes where I can party. Please don't hate me. Understand we have a different view of this value." And maybe that's part of what drove me to create this language around it and to help people talk about values in a kind of agnostic way.
Yeah, I think having shared language makes such a difference in
Yeah.
any conversation. So if we move to the next step, so let's say a student starts to figure out their values. Now
Yeah.
they need to start to figure out what might they be good at. You mentioned that
Right.
everybody has a unique talent that they can contribute to the world. How do students start to figure out what are they good at? What could they do?
All right. So the first thing to understand is this term aptitudes. Okay. So if you will go with me here for a moment, everyone, just pretend, unless you have a piece of paper in front of you, just pretend to write your name with your non-dominant hand. Okay. And then, that's awful. It's awkward. It looks ugly. Ugh. And then if you write with your dominant hand, it's natural. It feels good. Well, aptitudes are the dominant hand of your brain. You are wired in generally in 8 cognitive ways that make you better or worse at certain kinds of work. And so aptitudes then also include your strongest personality traits. And these things together combine to make you uniquely good at certain kinds of work. These are not skills. Skills you learn how to code, you learn how to do certain AI prompts, you learn how to write a digital ad that's going to get a lot of responses. Aptitudes are things like, are you a generalist or are you a specialist? Okay. They're like, are you a future focuser who loves big, hairy, audacious goals and really can think 2 years out? Or are you a present focuser who's really good at in the moment at execution? And there's 8 different categories of how your brain is wired. These are stable from age 15 on, and you can be tested for them. And there's many different ways you can be tested for them. You could probably be tested for them tomorrow at the career center at your college or university. And it's very important to know this data, because what ends up happening is, once again, we go take a job that sounds sort of cool. Maybe we like the brand. Maybe it's a company or a job title that would make our parents happy. And we don't think at all about how our brain is wired or what our presenting strong personality traits are. Is it a fit? And one of the things that happens in particular with consulting is that people who are specialists and present focusers go take consulting jobs, which is really for people who are generalists and future focusers. And it's a total mismatch between your self-portrait and the frame it's going in, to use a metaphor. So owning our knowledge of what our aptitudes are, and really by aptitudes, I mean how our brain is wired, and what our strong personality traits are. Owning that information about ourselves is some of the most powerful information we can ever have to unlock what we should be doing with our life.
I love that. That is so helpful. And then the last piece that you had sort of mentioned was then trying to figure out what does the world actually need and what's available out there in the market,
Right.
and
That's
how
right.
to fit who you are into those particular pieces. How should a student start to figure that piece out?
Well, this is easy, easier than the other two. And this is about figuring out what calls you emotionally and intellectually, what kinds of industries, what kind of companies, and what kind of work. So let's just start with industries. What ends up happening when we're in college and in graduate school is we start listening to recruiting narratives and group think. And we think, okay, basically we end up thinking there's finance, there's consulting, and there's tech. Oh, occasionally somebody thinks, oh, guess what? There's retail or pharmaceuticals. Okay. But the facts are there's 135 industries, and many of them are hungry for talent, but most students don't even think about aviation or tree and nut farming or the hundred. All you have to do is go to your Google search bar and type in government list industries, and you'll see 135 industries pop up. Do any of them call you? Does forestry, does rubber, does RV camp, recreation, do amusement parks? There's so many different industries. They all have people who need to work there in all different types of jobs. And we just cut them off because our aperture is closed down to what's on campus looking for us. And these companies are often desperate for really good talent. And we don't go knocking on their door because it's not in the usual group think. Then there's types of companies. Have we thought about this? Do we want large or small? Do we want a startup or a corporate canyon? Do we want a company that's customer focused or is much more industrial? What calls us, what interests us? And then finally, what kind of work? Is it HR? Is it logistics? Is it operations? And this is stuff that are, in many ways, what kind of work we do will be driven a little bit by what our aptitudes are, because different functions match up with our aptitudes. But typically, we're looking at way too small a pool of types of work, okay? Because we're looking for a job and we need a job and we're kind of freaked out, okay? We're kind of in panic mode. It's scary. The end of school is coming and you desperately, and I feel for you, okay? You desperately want a job and you're not thinking how big is the ocean? You're just thinking, where's the buoy, okay? And the thing is, if you can just raise your eyes and start looking around at all the different other kinds of industries and companies that exist, that they have so much more opportunity than we know, rather than everybody like making a rush for the same two doors.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we've seen, at least at Handshake, on the Handshake platform, is that more Gen Z, more class of 2024, and now we're seeing with the class of 2025 as well, students are more open to exploring industries and roles that they otherwise had not thought about before, which is, I think, very promising. And it's wonderful to see them exploring other industries that are actually growing while certain industries are shrinking or at least staying stable and not hiring nearly as many people. How
I
do
do two different, I'm sorry. I was just going to say in my class, just to force people to think about more industries, I play a game called Industry Bingo, where everybody gets a bingo card with sort of far-flung industries on it, industries that you would not normally think about if you were at a typical college or university. And after we play bingo a few rounds, everybody then has to choose one of the industries that's on their card, and they do a quick report and have to sell the rest of the class on working on that industry. And every single year, somebody comes up to me afterwards and says, I'm just changing my whole job search. I had no idea there was so much opportunity today, this happened to me, in gambling. And this is so cool. There's so much opportunity. You get to travel because somebody had done a report on it. And then I had a student a year ago who said, I don't understand why I wasn't looking at shipbuilding. This is so fascinating to me. Why must I do finance when I could do finance for a shipbuilding company and be around people who love the sea and heavy manufacturing like me? So that's one thing we do. The other thing we do, which I highly recommend to everybody on the call, is that we study megatrends. And it's easy to understand and follow megatrends. Right now, there's 12 big megatrends. A few years ago, guess what the big megatrend I was teaching was AI. And there were so many jobs just beginning to emerge in it. You may think, I can't go into quantum computing, or I can't go into space mining. I don't know anything about it. But the beauty of megatrends is nobody knows anything about these industries when they're just starting out. Get your foot in the door, learn with everybody. And you could be like, when I was in business school, there were 7 fellow students of mine. This is 1988. Okay. So, and when we all graduated, I was like everyone else. I went to Bain. Everybody, 85% of us went into banking or consulting from business school. And these 7 guys left, and we all said, well, where are you going? What are you doing? And they said, we're going to Silicon Valley. And everybody was like, what? And I remember saying to another student, where's Silicon Valley? Okay, this is 88. And somebody said, it's in California. And I said, well, why are they going there? And my fellow student said to me, I think they like golf. Okay. Anyway, they all became very successful billionaires because they followed a mega trend. That is also available to you. You have to do some splaining with your parents unless they've also got the pioneer spirit. But there's a lot. So megatrends is another place to look. Do not neglect.
Yeah, I love that advice. That's great advice. I'm going to ask you to provide the students with a little bit more tangible advice on this dilemma.
Okay.
So some of the students that are listening today, I know are thinking, okay, I know what my values are. I know what I'm really interested in. I would really like to go into this area, but I know that it's not an industry or role that is particularly affluent. And I have a lot of student loans that I need to pay back, or I come from a family where I need to now support my younger siblings to go to school, and I have some real financial constraints. How would you advise that student to think about the balance of both what they want, but also the reality of their life?
Yep. This is so real. I face it with my students every single day. It's very real. I have I have 2 thoughts on this. Number one is sometimes we do have to take the hit up front and take the job that pays us the most to get us on our feet and get us going in the direction we want. And we need to postpone our pursuit of purpose. And I totally get that. I totally feel for you. The problem with that is that if it's actually not matched to our aptitudes and values, we're going to wash out of it pretty soon, and we're going to be back at first square because those jobs are competitive. And if you go into it without the right values and without the right aptitudes, there's sort of an 80%. In a couple of years, you're going to be looking again, and you're going to be in this big setback and say, why did I do it? But say you're okay at them, you're good at them, and you can force yourself to do it because you need it and want it badly enough. Maybe you do it and you get yourself set, and then you have this is why I like becoming you. You sort of revisit the process in 2 or 3 years after you sort of get your feet on the ground. I myself did that. I was in terrible debt, and I went to go work at Bain for 7 years. And I then, after 7 years, had enough. We were settled, and I was able to step into my real life. But I would say this, there's a truth that you need to face into, which is if you go into a kind of work which matches your values and matches your aptitudes, the research would show both scientifically validated research and empirical research would show long-term, you're going to make more money in that pursuit than if you go into a job where your values and aptitudes are not a match that started off higher. So I can't draw because I don't have my blackboard here, but if you sort of think about it, is the people who are sort of good, their careers go like this when they go into a high paying job, but the people who go into it, it crosses and it goes up much faster. You're below, your salary is below, but then because your values and aptitudes are very high, at a certain point you cross. Let me just give you an example. Some of my students want to go into finance and consulting, and they go right out, and their starting salaries are 6 figures. But then you have a student who knows they're unbelievably good at HR, okay? And they are totally fascinated. Let's just choose shipbuilding, okay? And they take a sort of a beginning job in HR at a shipbuilding company, and they're literally making $45,000 a year, like a third of what their classmates who went into consulting did. But the shipbuilding company has a lot of opportunity for people who really believe in the industry, and you will be sooner in that shipbuilding company. You could be running the Latin American division of it, or you could be running the Americas of it, or you could be running all of global HR for it sooner and be making $800,000 sooner than any of your consulting colleagues. In 10 years, your salary and your success is going to be much higher than theirs if you went and did something. And so sometimes it's about having a conversation with your family to say, I'm taking a slightly different route. There is a method to my madness. I believe I'm betting on myself and on my skills and my aptitudes and my values that my career is going to be long, and but I'm going to take off at a certain point because I got on the right car at the start rather than this slow boat into someplace I really don't want to even be going. Okay. And then you find you can't even get out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's use that actually to segue to the very real conversation that many of these students are going to have next Thursday. It's Thanksgiving. They're around the dinner table, and their uncle, their aunt, their parent says, "What are you going to do with that? What are you going to do after graduation?" How might you advise students to answer that question in a way that feels substantive?
Well, it's actually kind of specific to your journey, but I think one way to give them confidence that you're thinking about it the right way is to say something. Let me suggest some language. Look, while I've been away at school, I've come to realize that there's kind of three ways to live your life, mom and dad, and you probably already know this already. And they all start with D. The first D is by default, where you just react and you take opportunities just sort of in a reactive pose. Okay, fine. I heard about this job. I'm going to go for it. It's not exactly right. And we live our lives just very reactively. That's just the default mode. And the second D is deliberation, where you start to get some intentionality around what you do with your life. And the third D is living by design, where you actually have a theory of your life and what you want to do with it. And that's a longer, harder road, but it has a much higher payoff. And I guess what I want to say to you is that I'm not trying to get myself to a place where I'm living by that second or third D, where I'm thinking about my job with a lot of deliberation or a lot of design. And therefore, the immediate answer that I give you may not be one that you love, because what you want to hear me say is, I'm working at Procter and Gamble in their intern program, but I'm trying to do the work to figure out if that's the right place. And I'd love your participation with me as I try to figure out my values and my aptitudes and what's available out there that calls me emotionally, intellectually. This is a process, and I really want to bring full intentionality to it, so that after a year of my first job, we all are feeling a lot of happiness about the direction it's going. And I welcome you into this journey with me. And if one of my kids had ever said something like that to me, I probably would have just dropped over from shock. But just to give them confidence that you are thinking about it in a way that is both philosophical and tactical. Okay, I'm trying to wrap my arms around my life just like you are. And what I'm trying to push back against here, lovingly, mom and dad, is being like a pinball in a pinball machine, bouncing all over the place. Oh, I heard about this job. I heard about that job. So and so's hiring. This person's hiring. My roommate got this job, and you're bouncing all around. That's one way to live, but it's not the best way to live. Okay, and you want to bring some kind of intentionality and methodology to your process. I think that gives your parents a moment to breathe with you.
Yeah, I actually think we have a couple parents that have slipped into today's workshop and webinar. And I'm curious if you had any advice for the parents that have actually joined us today on how they can be most productive in supporting their student through this journey.
I do. And I did it myself, but way too late with my first child. So I have 4 children. And the first child took all the hard knocks, but by the time I got into my 4th child, I had it right. And that is, okay, you want your kid to have a job, and you need them to, okay? Because you know where they're going to be if they don't get a job, right? Which is right back home with you. And look, I love it when my kids are with me, but at a certain point, you're like, let's get on with life here. Parents, my loving advice to you would be to, instead of trying to help your kid find instead of just trying to help your kid find a job, help your child get to a place where they understand and can identify their values, help them with figuring out what their true cognitive and emotional aptitudes are, and help them open up their aperture to figure out how big the world of work really is. Helping them with that process is as valuable as helping them apply and apply and apply to a lot of jobs where they may never hear back from them.
I love that. I love that. Now, I don't know where you stand on this particular topic, but I will share where I stand. I am personally not a fan of people saying, do your passion, look for your passion.
Oh, no.
And I want to make sure that we clarify that passion and aptitude are not the same thing. Do you agree with that statement?
I could not agree more. I can't stand that advice because you may be I'm passionate about singing, okay? But I've literally been at church where people have turned around, and it's supposed to be the nicest place in the world, have turned around and said, please stop singing so loudly, okay? I would have loved to have been a singer, but I don't have the aptitude, okay? And so if you have an absolute passion for crypto and you have a talent for it as well, power to you. The problem is they have to be married. Okay, so if you are passionate about, here's a big one, spectator sports. Lots of people want to go and they somehow want to work in the world of football. They love it. It's their passion. Okay, but the football's an industry and it takes certain skills like negotiation. I have a friend who used to negotiate the salaries for the players of the Patriots. And he ended up, after doing that for 20 years, being a professor of negotiation at Harvard Business School. He clearly had an aptitude. It wasn't because he loved football. In fact, he was sort of meh on football. All right. So if you have a passion, beautiful, make sure you have the aptitudes to go into those fields, because a lot of fields with passions are the ones where everybody wants to be in them. Like Hollywood's a perfect case. I mean, everybody's, that's an industry where everybody wants to be near entertainment. You have to be very good at something they need. All right. Something that is because it's very competitive. So I'm with you on this one, 100%.
Yeah. And I think what I would also say to students that are listening is sometimes you will discover that you have an interest or a passion after you do it or after
Yeah.
you're exposed to it, right?
Yeah.
After you learn it. And that's okay too. You might discover something
Yeah.
that you discovered down the line has become a passion. I personally love helping students to transition in their life, whether that's college to career or honestly from high school to college. Those transition points for me, I discovered, are so meaningful, and I love working with students in their decision-making process through that. I can guarantee you in high school and in college, I was not saying that my passion is helping people discover transition points. Like that wasn't something I even had language for. So I think sometimes just experiencing life allows you to figure out some of those pieces. And I think that's a really important
That's a great point. That's a great point. But I would actually push on you on that one. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. But I think sometimes our passions light up when we're doing something that fulfills our values and our aptitudes, because that's when we're feeling very exquisitely alive. Like what you're doing, you're really good at it. Why? Because you have the aptitudes for it. You're really good at it. And it's aligned with your values. You probably are very high on the value that we call in the lexicon non-sibi, which is the impulse to help people. And you're probably off the charts on that value. And the fact that you're able to live your value every day is what's causing the passion.
Oh, interesting. I love that. Thank you. That is very cool. That is very cool. Well, I know we are running close on time and we have gotten a lot of questions for you in the Q&A. So I want to actually bring Brenton back on so that she can help moderate our questions so that we can try and get to a few more questions than we had anticipated. Brenton, over to you.
Amazing. I'm so glad that we have the opportunity to get to a few more questions because we have gotten a lot of really good ones. And I think I would like to start with one that I think is a really great question from Karen, which is how can I do more research on the mega trend job market that you were talking about a little bit earlier? And we had another person ask, how do you recommend people go about researching and gaining access to mega trends in the most secure way possible? So do you have any guidance for folks who are really interested in kind of digging in more in that space? As they consider their career path.
Absolutely. Luckily, there's a whole little army of us who are addicted to megatrends, and there's a whole industry that feeds us. So the place to start is just to there's a great magazine that it's completely devoted to megatrends, which is called Regus. It's free, Regus. You can subscribe to it. There is all the big consulting firms put out megatrend reports. Goldman Sachs has a very good podcast on megatrends. And I think the great vast internet and its algorithm, as soon as you start Googling and searching for megatrends, will start feeding you megatrends. There's TikTok feeds, there's Instagram feeds. Occasionally on my own Instagram feed, I talk about megatrends. And so the availability and conversation around megatrends is very, very available. You just have to do actually almost the most preliminary search. Gartner is another really good way to find out about megatrends, Gartner.com. And so the search is right out there. Deloitte has a great megatrends report, and those are good places to start.
Amazing. And since you're talking about specific resources, not only about megatrends, I would love to open that a little bit more broadly because we're getting a lot of folks who are asking questions about resources that you would recommend for folks who are really trying to do that values work and identify their values and kind of differentiate those from their aptitudes and kind of discerning those.
Yes.
Do you have any recommendations? I'm going to open the floor for anything that you would recommend there.
Yes. Okay. So obviously, I like my own values tool very much. I have something called the Values Bridge. It's in beta right now. And if you'd like to be a beta tester for it, and you will actually for free completely get a list of your values if you are a beta tester, let us know at hello@SuzyWelch.com. That's SUZY Welch.com. Hello@SuzyWelch.com. You will get a values bridge beta test, and it will give you a list of your values. And it will also show you a scary number, or maybe a good number, which is a number that is the difference between the life you're currently living and the life you would like to be living according to your values, the variance score. So that's one way to do the values, to find out more about the values. I hate to like promote myself here, but I have a podcast, and almost on every single podcast, I do another one of the values exercises, and similarly with my newsletter. I often give you one of the values exercises. I mean, there are other ways to do it. If you go online and say, how do I learn my values? There are some other values tests out there, but I'm kind of partial right now because I've worked so hard on creating sort of a package of them. And so I invite you to start with the values bridge because it's so efficient, and you don't have to do much more after that because you get your values back right away. It takes 20 minutes or so.
I think 20 minutes is a worthwhile
Yeah.
amount of time to spend in the
Yeah.
interest of the future.
So I could save you 20 years. So
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. I would love to get into something of a spicy question that Christine, you might also have a take on as well. We have an anonymous question asker who is saying, how would you respond to the idea that people determine a lot of their upward salary mobility in their 20s, meaning that if you take a lower paying job now, your salary potential for the rest of your life is hindered? Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of setting the precedent for the rest of your career, and how you can kind of do that internal work when it comes to your aptitudes, when it comes to your values, but also thinking about kind of your long-term career prospects?
Christine?
Sure. Well, I will actually share more personally. I chose a more low-paying industry to start off with because it very much aligned with both my aptitude and my values. So I chose higher education as my first foray into the working world. And for those of you that are familiar with higher education, you go get your master's, you come out, and you start off making somewhere between $35,000 and $42,000 a year. So I actually don't think that what your choice to take a lower paying job initially has to hinder. I think it depends on the decisions you make while you are part of that time in your life. So I knew that I was making less, but what I also knew was that if I wanted to set myself up down the road for more, I needed to be a better saver. I needed to learn how to invest. I needed to be smart about any little money I was bringing in to make it really work for me. I also am actually a huge believer in what Suzy was talking about, which is if you actually do something that aligns with your aptitude and your values, you are more likely to have a faster trajectory upward. And that was very true for me because opportunities opened up. And it was my decision and my responsibility to step through those doors when those things opened up. But there was so much more that opened up for me because I was so interested in what I did. And I showed initiative, I showed drive, I showed hunger. And those are the things that your employers, regardless of what industry you go into, are looking for. That's what they want. They don't want sort of like the, I guess I'm here. Like, that's not the kind of worker they want, right? They want someone who's hungry and who's going after it. And so if those things align for you, you're more likely to show up that way when you're at work, which then therefore leads to more potential opportunity. And it's your responsibility to, one, see those as opportunities, and then two, take advantage of those opportunities when that happens. So I don't know that I buy into like, you're going to get pigeonholed in that way. I think there are ways for you to break out of that, but you have to be smart about it.
Thank you, Christine. Okay, I have another one that is
I was
not a
can I just
similar-
I was just
Sorry
gonna add
about
one
that.
little thing to that. That's interesting, Christine, what you say. There's fascinating research that actually that seems to suggest that the thing that kills your salary is majoring in the wrong thing in college. So that if you actually major in something that is then not related to your career, that's the biggest setback, which really puts a lot of pressure on you majoring on the right thing. That when I saw that research, it was very sobering. I would just step back a little bit to say, what are the determinants of long-term financial success? What are they? Well, I think that the answer is PIE. This is based on empirical research, but I've never had anybody ever disagree with it. What leads to long-term financial success? The P is the quality of your relationships with people. The I is the quality of your ideas. And E is the quality of your execution, whether you get it done. Okay. So what you want to do if you want to make a lot of money is put yourself in a place, in a job, in an industry where you're going to have very high quality relationships with people you like. And when you're going to like them, it's probably because their values are like yours, where you're going to have the best ideas. So that has to do with aptitudes. Okay. Whether or not you're in a place where your ideas are going to be the best, not the middle of the pack where your ideas are going to be the best. And if you're a person who has a lot of ideas about something in a field that you're not in, that's not good. And lastly, you need to be in a field where you like the work so much you execute properly. So that to me is the thing to do, is to ask whatever job you're taking, am I going to nail it on PIE in this job? Do I like the people? Am I going to be friends with a lot of them? Will I have good ideas in this space or just mediocre ones? And do I like this work so much, I'm going to be the person who gets it done the best? That's what I would just add.
Amazing. I would love to get to a question that I think is indicative of a larger flavor of several of the many questions that we've received over the course of this session, which is, for folks who are already on a career path, who are potentially thinking about making a change. This asker is saying, for those of us in roles that aren't aligned with our values and are looking to make a change, how do you recommend broaching that topic with our superiors? How can we honor radical candor in those conversations while still being strategic and not burning any bridges? So do you have any kind of advice for somebody who might be thinking about making a pivot based on kind of an understanding of their values and some of this work that you're encouraging and wanting to honor that while also navigating the professional space in a smart way?
I think what I'm hearing this question to be is like, what if I realize I'm in the wrong job because it's not a match with my values and possibly not a match with my aptitudes? How do I broach that with my boss? Am I understanding the question correctly?
Yes. Yeah. I think navigating the actual pivot and the communication of that pivot.
Well, it's pretty deadly. I mean, to actually go to your own boss and say, I want to pivot here because my values are not aligned is if you're going to do that, even if you have a very loving boss and a good boss, it's pretty dangerous. And you have to be ready to leave if you're going to do that. But if you have the desire to do it very much and you want to, and you think you could do it in your own company, then I'd be surprised, because if you have a values disconnect, it's going to be with the whole company. So I think you have to make a determination about whether or not the pivot is worth losing the job over. Because if you're pivoting because of values, you're probably going to have to leave. As the way your personal values translate in the workplace is what the company's culture is. So if your values are in opposition to the company's culture, that's very, very hard to fix while you're inside. So I would say it's hard to give you advice about how to do that without hurting or without hurting your chances of progression, unless you're at a fantastic company where they will accommodate people going to different parts of the company. But if there's a values disconnect, it's hard for me to imagine a way it's going to get fixed inside that exact company. Sorry.
Christine, did you have anything you wanted to add there as well?
No, I think those are really accurate and on point. The only thing I would add is if you have identified for yourself opportunities within your current workplace that would maybe align with some of your values and gives you an opportunity to get some experience in those ways, that is something you could talk to your supervisor about. Like, I would love to serve on this committee. I would love to help with this project.
Yeah.
Like that sort of thing. You could use that potentially as a segue,
Yeah.
but you're going to have to identify that yourself.
Yeah.
Awesome. Another flavor that I'm seeing a lot of, so I'm going to pick one that's kind of indicative of a larger theme in these questions, is from Layla, which is, do you have any advice for not being afraid of change or fear of making decisions about your own future? Can you speak a little bit about fear and kind of grappling with that as you navigate your future planning?
One of the first things I do when I walk in, besides teaching Becoming You, I also teach a very large class teaching people how to be managers, and called Management with Purpose. And it's usually a very large class. And one of my favorite things to ask on the first day is, who here has been fired? And oh my God, nobody wants to be fired. Nobody, two people raise their hands. They're ashamed of it. And I say, I hope you're all fired soon. Because what ends up happening is what getting fired teaches you, and most of us are fired in our careers. I've been fired, okay? And what you realize is you don't die. It's not pleasant. There's a terrible bunch of feelings around it. Oftentimes you're embarrassed, and it takes a while before you get back on your feet. And if there's a financial implication, that stinks. I get it. But it does teach you this incredibly important lesson, which is radical change. And there's nothing radically changing like quite like getting fired, is that better stuff always comes out of it. And so if you're afraid of change, my suggestion to you is go force yourself to get into situations where there's a lot of risk and where you're going to have to change and you're completely out of your comfort zone, because you're very quickly going to find out and figure out that you're fine and you live and it's sort of cool, and you're going to sort of you build the muscle for it. The more we fear change, the more it sort of knocks us on our back when it happens. But the people who throw themselves into it over and over again just sort of think like, yeah, bring it. At a certain point, you just get to the point where you've had so much change in your career and you've been put on your rear end enough times, you sort of think like, fine, I'll get up again. And so my advice to you is the exact opposite of what you want to hear, which is don't run farther. And there's nothing you can do but just sort of embrace it, let yourself fail a few times, and you're going to find out you're going to be just fine. The first time I was fired, I was in my 40s. I had done everything in my life to be a good girl and to be the best employee. Good Susie, okay? I just couldn't, the idea of it. And then I got fired. And when I got fired, I was in such a big job that was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And I thought I was going to die. And my husband said to me, get over yourself. And I said, no. I said to him, I'll never work again. I'm never going to have another job. And I cried. And he just would roll his eyes at me like, get over it. You're going to be fine. And 2 days later, this is a true story. 2 days later, Oprah called me and asked me to come work for the magazine. And he said, okay, over yourself now. And I was like, I never thought, okay. And okay, that's a big story. I had a big career by that point. But my point is, I want all young people to have what I had in my 40s in their 20s, so that they have the courage to put themselves out there and to understand you can live through anything, and you will. And the sooner you develop the muscle for just picking yourself up again, the better.
Yeah. Can I add one thought to this? Change is a muscle that you have to build, and it is just like working out. If you do not regularly exercise it, it will atrophy. And so what you need to do as the most tactical, tangible next step is take the tiniest steps towards getting yourself comfortable with change. Okay, so I will give you 3 things that you could do. One is, I want you to, however you normally get home from work or school, I want you to take a different route today.
Love.
Drive a different route. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, whatever your normal morning routine is, change it. If you typically brush your teeth, take a shower, then eat breakfast, I want you to go for a workout, eat breakfast, and then shower. I just want you to change it up, okay? These really small actions literally help you to start feeling more comfortable with doing things differently. And the third thing is, choose a hobby, choose anything. I don't care what it is. Choose something that you have some semblance of an interest in, but you kind of know you're actually not that good at.
Yeah.
And I want you to just commit to doing it for 6 months. And I did this to prove a point to my child a while ago, that it is okay to do things that you're not very good at, and to just keep at it. I chose hip hop dancing. So that is what I did for a whole year. And I even performed in a recital in front of people, but it just helps you get out of your comfort zone and to be more comfortable with change and with something different than what you are used to. So those are
fabulous.
Easy things that you can do.
Yeah. Fabulous. Those are great.
Thank you so much for that advice from both of you. And speaking of easy things that you can do to kind of set yourself up for change or set yourself up for the future, we have a question from Janae, which I think is very timely and topical, and I would love to get your take on. What steps can students take during the upcoming holiday break to set themselves up for success in the job market? So I know a lot of this work that we've been talking about is, quite introspective and quite, you know, big picture. Do you have any small things that you would recommend for folks who might be home for just a couple of days that they can really do to set themselves apart as they navigate the next steps in their career path?
One idea recommend to all of my students is to have a narrative about yourself. Okay, companies need you to explain yourself to them, and there's a narrative of who you are and what you want to do that you need to tell companies. They're not going to look at you and create the narrative. You have to offer it to them. Okay, and so if you've got some time and you can think about who you are and what you want and what you're good at, to actually write that narrative, even if it's just a few sentences. And you may be leading with your personality traits at this point because you don't have a lot of skills and you're not exactly sure what your aptitudes are because you haven't done a lot of testing or you don't have a lot of work experience. But know your story, know your narrative. And so that when the time comes, you can tell it to people and you can own it. You will refine it and tweak it again and again in your life. But I think it's a very, very good use of your time.
Love that. Christine, do you have anything you want to add?
Oh, I think it's great.
Fabulous. Okay, I have a bit of an existential question that I would love to understand from both of you. Miguel is asking, is it possible to have conflicting values? And how do you tackle that? Suzy, you look like you got really
This is
excited about that
all right,
question.
this is the area, this is my technical area of study. So absolutely. And in fact, when my values bridge tool is finally done, which we think will be in March, you will actually get a score telling you about the intensity of the conflict of your values. And this is the work of our life. There definitely are values that are in conflict. So for instance, if you have a very high value of work centrism and a very high value of achievement, those often go together. Okay, that work is the organizing principle of your life, achievement is an organizing principle of your life. But guess what else is? Family. Okay. And this doesn't matter when your family is just you and your parents, but this will matter a lot more when you're married and have children or just have a family ecosystem of any kind. Those can be in direct opposition because you can't have work organizing your life and decisions and family organizing your life and decisions at the same time without a lot of noise. Okay. And many of us who are working parents, I was my whole life, you manage that paradox and that tension your whole life long. Okay. And some of that is just being an adult and you've got to go through it just like the rest of us go through it. But there are other values that you don't just manage. So for instance, I I sometimes encounter students who have an incredibly high value of affluence and fame, which we call luminance. Okay. They want to be rich and famous, but they have a low value of work centrism. They're not crazy about work. Okay, I'll get it. And they have a high value of fun, eudaimonia. Okay, this is a bundle. Welcome to being a human being. We want to be rich and famous, but we also want to have a super amount of fun and not work that hard. Okay, and then we don't get it and we get very frustrated. And but what's really going on is you have a bundle of values that are in conflict. And the only thing you can do about that is understand what your values are and then stop and say, some of this is the universe's fault. Some of this is, when I say to my students, you can't want to be rich and famous at 7, that's the highest on the chart, and have a work at 2. The world doesn't work that way. And then they get very mad at the world and they say, it shouldn't work that way. And I say, maybe it shouldn't, but it does. Okay. And so I think that the trick is to come to terms with what you want more. Do you want to be rich or famous more? Or do you want to, work? I mean, what is it? Is it not having work or is it being rich, famous? And you sometimes these sort of meet in the middle. And other times people wake up and say, I'm giving up the rich and famous part of it. I just don't want to work that much. But we have to manage those trade-offs. It is 1000% human to have conflicting values. And the work of our life is figuring out what those conflicts are and ironing them out.
Yes. Can I actually ask you a follow-up question, Suzy, that I know one of our listeners has actually asked, and I think it kind of ties to this. What are your tips on what if your partner's values are different from your values and you're living a life together and you're trying
Yes.
to build a family together, an ecosystem
Yes.
together? What do you do with that? I feel like that's kind of similar in this way. Do you have to rank order whose values are higher? Like, how do you have that conversation?
All right. Well, every couple handles it differently. I just went through a couples counseling in my Becoming Us program with, which is a couples related thing for becoming you people, where the variance score for one spouse was very, very high. In other words, he was not living his life the way he wanted to live it at all. And the wife's variance score was almost zero. In other words, she was living her perfect life, and they have to have a very big conversation around that. And this is a fantastic question, because when we are in a relationship, whether we're married or just partnered, not having aligned values is where the trouble all begins. And so sometimes what couples do, the way they cope, is that for a couple number of years, they live by one person's values, and then they say, okay, you had your years, and then they go over to the other person's values. The best way to work, I think that's some couples live their whole life that way, sort of swapping whose values take precedence. My suggestion would be that you have a complete, honest accounting of what your values are and where the differences are between them, and you come up with solutions. If you love each other and you have enough values in common, you can and will work it out.
That's great.
But I mean, this is the most common thing is the minute people find out their values, the first thing they want is, if they're in a partnered relationship, is to know what their partner's values are also, because they sense something's amiss. Yeah.
Thank you both so much. I know we are coming up on time. I do want to thank everybody for all the questions you submitted. We didn't have enough time to get to all of them. For those of you who might have more kind of tactical early career questions, Christine will actually be doing open office hours in half an hour. The link is in the chat, so feel free to come by and ask your questions there. And to answer some of the questions that we received, this is being recorded. We will be sharing out that link for everybody to revisit this session later. So look out for that in your inboxes. I want to thank Suzy and Christine so much for being here today. Do you have any final words that you would want to share with our audience before we wrap it up?
I would just say, very tactically, tell your parents, tell your family, you listen to Suzy Welch's webinar today, you're going to listen to her podcast, you're going to sign up to be a beta tester, and those are some tactical things that you are doing.
Love it. That's a really great way to wrap things up. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Christine and Suzy. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us and for the gift of your attention. And I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Thank
All
you so
right.
much.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.